During this major debate in October 1971, in which many members of the House of Commons on both sides took part about British entry into the European common market, some mention was made, but was soon forgotten because there was so much else to discuss, about what the Conservative position had been in the general election of 1970. They had put out a statement in their election literature and in their election manifesto saying that our commitment is to negotiate, neither more nor less. They did not say our commitment is, if we secure advantageous terms, as they saw them, to enter into the common market without any further consultation with the British people. And I think that the British people, or a lot of them, were misled by this reassuring statement, which in fact turned out to be absolutely meaningless.
But it's worse than that, and Eric has put his finger absolutely on the spot. Because when it came to the big debate which he has mentioned, which lasted the week of 60 hours, and a definitive vote at the end, which was carried on a mixed party basis,
by a majority of 112.
The majority was, of course, only there, but nobody had actually heard what the terms and the agreement was. So the whole thing, if it had been a financial matter, would have been an actionable fraud, and it was a constitutional fraud. It was a con on our British Constitution, and a con on Parliament, and a con on the public, and it was a surrender of the powers of the Crown to what it turned out to be a quasi-central government of a Central European state, or a Western European state. And that's what it turned out to be, and that's what it still is.
Yeah. I think that the debate in October 1971 on the issue of principle of British entry was certainly a fraud on the British public. But it also represented, I think, and this is very important in the light of subsequent events to remember, it represented a surrender by virtually the whole of the British establishment, I'm not just talking about politicians here, to the idea that Britain's future, come what may, depended on being part of a West European economic and potentially political union. That Britain could no longer throw its weight around in the world or exercise influence, to be more polite, without being a member of this union. And therefore, those who supported entry in both parties were imbued, obsessed with the idea that this was the only way ahead for Britain. Regardless, and they did recognise some of them, there would be some disadvantages, but for them, the overwhelming advantage was that we would be a member of a large trading bloc, which could become even more powerful in the course of time, as it's tried to do in the last 30 or 40 years, and that would help British influence throughout the world. I happen to disagree with that point of view profoundly. I've never been a member of the establishment, but that was generally the view of people on the right and on the left in British politics, who saw this as an opportunity for regaining the sort of influence which Britain had tried to exercise before the Second World War and subsequently lost.
But unfortunately, if I can add to that very astute summing up, is that it was even worse than that, because it was portrayed as a European community. And the word community in all our language is largely local, or one where people are not communists. Oh no, because there was a big, of course, big difference between the free enterprise and democratic approach of the West and the threat, which was much stronger then, from the East, from Comecon and the other political groupings. And the so-called Cold War hadn't warmed up by that stage. So there was that in it. But what I think was worse was that there was a thing called the European movement, which we haven't mentioned. Now, I was part of that in action, as I've mentioned, when I went to help do a bit of rebuilding in bombed Hamburg and keep in touch with German friends. But the other form of community, European Economic Community, was one of rules and competition. And so the whole of the language and the whole of the way things were being put across was not only wrong, but I would have thought against the principles of sound democracy itself. Can I go on to the next end of the con, which was perhaps constitutionally even more blatant, but in terms of what constitution we had at the time, but hardly recognised now, but shows the extent to which, over this period of a year or so, or more, the Heath administration, and he as a soldier in the Second World War, ought to have known better as a political leader. A very strange and interesting man, but I won't go further than that. As to what happened on the 20th of January, when we had another debate relating to the treaty itself, because the negotiations took place, first of all between the applicants and themselves, then in secret between the applicants and the representatives of the European Community or Union, which were largely its officials from the Commission. Certainly they were very strong there, as well as the officials of the Union itself. And then that was done in private with those together. And then, of course, in private between our own Foreign Secretary and our own government for any things that would apply only to Britain. So it was all done behind the scenes to start with. Then we come to this interesting debate of the 20th of January 1972, when the Labour opposition, and this time the minister, the shadow minister responsible, the late Peter Shaw, who even people on other sides of the House, I think, saw him as a man of coming help and integrity. But he died, unfortunately, not very long afterwards, to the great loss of both East London, where he was an adjacent member of Parliament to myself, but also to Parliament and to Western democracy itself. But he was then the spokesman for the then opposition against Ted Heath's government. On the 20th of January 1972, he then moved a party motion, or it was an opposition motion in this case, where he said, recognising the unique character of the treaty, this House calls upon Her Majesty's Government not to sign the Treaty of Accession to the European Economic Community until the full text has been published and its contents laid before the House for its consideration.
Nothing could be more simple than that, or you'd have thought more justified, that the House of Commons, the Supreme Parliament in the United Kingdom, should have the texts of what it was supposed to be agreeing to before it took a decision. Otherwise it was in part like signing a blank cheque.
But that had already happened once in the weeks-long debate which we've already described, where they didn't do it when they should have done, right at the beginning. And when Ted Heath said to me, or I said to Ted Heath, you're asking us to sign by agreeing with the agreements which you've said over this whole long week, and you haven't told us what they are. That's almost actionable, isn't it, in civil law? Anyway, there we are.